On today's episode of the Metal Command podcast, I review Bruce Dickinson's revised version of his second solo album, More Balls to Picasso. I also talk about Sebastian Bach's record label putting pressure on him to gain more followers on Spotify. I review the debut album by Nefarious, and I talk about Helloween's brand new single, Universe Gravity for Hearts. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you, and super excited, of course, to be here with everybody today. And, of course, if you do want to support this program, by all means, I welcome your support. Hit that subscribe button here on YouTube. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And if you follow the show on any other form of social media or streaming service, please, by all means, give the show a like and a follow there. Today's show, always a lot to talk about. I'm going to talk about the brand new Helloween single, Universe Gravity for Hearts, and why I think that was the perfect song for them to put out as their second single. I'm going to talk about the debut album by Nefarious, which consists of a lot of really great Bay Area thrash veteran musicians, and they, of course, played their first show. And if you hadn't seen the interview with myself, Doug Piercy and Rick Hunel, by all means, that is going to be in the show notes, so I'll make that available to all of you. Sebastian Bach's record label has basically told him he needs to gain more followers on Spotify. And I have thoughts on that because Sebastian Bach clapped back saying Spotify sucks, and most of his fan base does not use it. And there's a lot I agree with as far as what he says about this. So I'll go into that pretty soon as well. So first, though, let's talk about Bruce Dickinson revising his second solo album. It's called More Balls to Picasso. And it's a remix and a revision of his second solo album, which came out back in 1994. Probably one of the most forgotten albums that anybody from the heavy metal scene has ever put out. And definitely one of the quirkiest records I personally have ever heard. So let's go back in time a little bit and talk about this. So I'm going to give you my personal story with this. Because this was Bruce's first real collaboration with Roy Z. And before I talk about the record, let's go into Roy Z and his version of how he met Bruce Dickinson and started working with him. Check out this clip.
How did it come about that you started working with Bruce Dickinson in 1994 when Balls to Picasso came out? And talk a bit about working with Bruce on his solo material.
Well, right place at the right time, I guess you could say. Tribe of Gypsies was mixing in the evening at a studio called Goodnight LA, and Bruce was in there during the day working on what was a solo record, right? And I mean, nobody knew at the time that he was going to leave Maiden and all that. He was just there working in LA, working on a solo record. And long story short, one day they forgot. They told Bruce, "You have a day off tomorrow," and he must have forgot because he showed up for work, and we were in the studio mixing and. I didn't recognize him when I first saw him because I just saw a big wad of hair flying everywhere to one of our songs, and I was pretty ticked, to be honest with you. And when he turned around, he goes, "Hey, I'm Bruce. I love your band, and I want to help you guys." A week later, I'm on a plane going to London. London, England. I was like 22 or 23, something like that. And so then from there, we just, he wanted us, after that, he canned that album he was working on. He's like, "I like your album better. It's real fresh. Let's do something weird and bring your band and me together." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we did that experiment. It was cool. Bruce didn't really want to do anything kind of too heavy metal or, because he was just, I think he was trying to exercise Maiden at that point from his, at least a little bit musically, And so we made Balls to Picasso, and there's some good stuff there. Tears of the Dragon, for me, was always the song, that he wrote. It was a beautiful song.
Okay, that's Roy Z talking about how he met Bruce Dickinson. So now let's talk about Balls to Picasso. Folks, when this album came out, nobody cared about heavy metal in the United States anymore. Most people didn't care or couldn't have cared less at the time when this album came out. Now, I bought it when it came out. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context as to what I mean by that. Because pretty much heavy metal died overnight in the United States back in 93, 94. So me, being a young kid and buying this album, I'll give you a funny story of how people really didn't care about it back then. So I ended up getting into Iron Maiden back in 1993. I found a copy of Power Slave and Peace of Mind in a record store. I took a chance on it. I love the cover. And, you know, I liked heavy metal, but Iron Maiden is the band that really made me like a lifelong fan of this kind of music. When I first heard Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight, you know, and I started listening to some of these songs on Peace of Mind, like Revelation and Flight of Icarus and stuff like that, folks, I was all in on heavy metal. And Iron Maiden was the band which, as a fan, pulled me into absolutely loving this kind of music. So I ended up getting into them in 1993, about the time when Bruce, you know, had announced his departure from the band. Now, you had the Raising Hell last concert with that magician that they had. But I loved everything Iron Maiden. As soon as I had those two albums, Peace of Mind and Power Slave, I bought the entire discography. Everything I could find by Maiden, import singles, anything I could find by them, I owned it. And I remember a Real Live one came out. Then you had a Real Dead one come out. Then you had the Live at Donington, 1992, which I had to import over here, that show. And then I ended up buying the VHS tape, the Japanese. I think it was only available in Japan. Because Japanese VHS would play in VHS players in that format would play over here. So I had to go to Japan to get that concert on a VHS cassette tape. It was like $50 to get that thing too, which was crazy. But I had all that stuff. And for me, Iron Maiden was like the biggest band in the world. I mean, I absolutely loved their music. And as a kid, unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize heavy metal had died overnight in the States. So back in the old days, you could pre-order albums at a music store. That's right. A lot of where you ended up getting your music, you didn't have Amazon. You didn't really have much of an internet back then. You went to music stores. And so I remember looking in Metal Edge magazine in 1994, and they talked about an album by Bruce Dickinson, his second solo album that was going to be coming out, brand new solo album. I had never heard Tattooed Millionaire at this point. I didn't even know it existed, to be honest with you. And I know that sounds crazy now, but back then, again, things were different. There was no internet, so information was not as easy to come by. I remember riding my bike up to this music store, knowing this album was coming out. The clerk at the counter, I walk in. Now, I'm thinking to myself, man, everybody's going to want this record. I got to pre-order mine so I can guarantee to get my copy. I go into the music store, and keep in mind, too, music stores also, if you pre-ordered the album, they would take a couple of dollars off. So most like brand new releases would be like $15.99, $14.99, depending on the band. And if you pre-ordered it, you got $2 off. So I went in there and I go to this guy, I go, dude, I need you to pre-order me this album. Are you getting any in? And the dude's like, yeah, I'm getting some copies in. I'm like, well, I'm going to pre-order mine because I don't want any copies I don't want it to run out. I want to guarantee that the album doesn't get sold out, because to me, obviously, Iron Maiden is this huge band. And the guy looked at me and started laughing at me. And his exact words, and I will never forget this, verbatim, were, nobody cares about heavy metal in the United States anymore, so you will not have a problem getting this album. But I'll let you pre-order it and give you $2 off. That is what he said to me. And I'm like, well, what do you mean nobody cares? He goes, nobody cares about heavy metal bands anymore. And so, lo and behold, I go to pick up my copy of the album. You usually would get it a day before it came out, too, if you pre-ordered. I get my copy, and I went into this music store quite a bit. The store doesn't exist anymore. The name of the store was called Music for You. I think now it's like a honey baked ham shop is what it ended up becoming once it was sold, way back in the day. But really nobody did care about this record when it came out. Nobody. It was like heavy metal died overnight in the United States. Not everywhere around the world, but here it definitely didn't exist anymore. Grunge was in full force. Any heavy metal bands that were played on the radio were dropped, aside from maybe like Metallica. And it was just a dead genre. I mean, the only real metal bands doing anything here you had was, maybe Pantera. Ozzy was still doing somewhat pretty well. You had Metallica doing pretty well, but for the most part, many of these bands were not. And Iron Maiden certainly was not, because Bruce had left. So, mind you, I go and pick this album up, and I have like one of those portable CD players that you had in your car back then with a little tape adapter, and I'm listening to this in my car. And I thought to myself, man, this is the most bizarre and quirky record I've ever heard. But the thing is, the more I listened to it, the more I loved it. And it came to a point where, I'll be honest, I really loved the record. I really did like it. Now, is it my favorite album in Bruce's discography? No, that would be Chemical Wedding. But it was definitely a much different record than anything I've ever heard before or since. Just nothing sounds like it. And when you have albums like that, typically people's opinions are all over the board. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Some people think it's garbage. Some people think, yeah, it's okay. But it's generally not really held as in high regard like the later Bruce Dickinson solo albums. Like people, love Accident of Birth a lot more, Chemical Wedding, Tyranny of Soul. So this album kind of gets, overlooked a little bit. They ended up coming out with a remaster with a second disc, and the second disc had even crazier stuff on it, like songs like No Way Out. You had Cadillac Gas Mask, which is a pretty interesting track, and it had a lot of other more quirky stuff on that second disc of bonus material that was recorded during that album's time period, and that intrigued me a lot. I would not say this is my favorite Bruce Dickinson solo album, but it is definitely one of the more intriguing albums he's ever done. So now let's talk about more Balls to Picasso, the revised version. So just so you know what this is, it's remixed, and there are guitar parts and other instruments added on into many of these songs. And in many cases, the additional parts add a completely different dynamic to the song. So for example, let's go to the song Cyclops, first song in the album. Very slow, very, very weird, quirky song that, you listen to it and you're like, man, I wouldn't expect a Bruce Dickinson album to sound like this, but it does. They add keyboards to it, which I know that doesn't sound like much, but it does change the way the song sounds and the whole dynamic of it. Compared to the original one. 1,000 Points of Light, for example. During the chorus, they have these like guitar solos going during the chorus, like these guitar parts being played that didn't exist there before. So a lot of these songs, like Change of Heart, has a lot of different, weird instruments in it, Laughing in the Hiding Bush. So they all have stuff that has been added to these tracks, which makes the album even more quirkier. Some of the songs, it changes the dynamic of, for them for the better. Like 1,000 Points of Light, gotta be honest, I like the new version of this better than the original. But there are other songs that I think, like Shoot All the Clowns, I think the original version of it is better than this one. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me as how I look at this. It's an interesting take on the album. The remix, I thought, was pretty solid. Could have been probably a little better, but it's hard to say because they added all these other instruments and they added all this stuff to these songs. Tears of the Dragon, that is the one song people universally love off this album. I think they added a lot of stuff to it, but I like the original version of the song a lot better. But Tears of the Dragon actually is the one song off of this that the fan base universally absolutely loves. So do I like it as a whole better than the original? Probably not. But I think some of the revised parts are very interesting to listen to because, again, this is a very different album. Now you have some studio tracks on here, Gods of War, and then Shoot All the Clowns live in the studio. Just so you all know, these are not versions from the live album Alive in Studio A, which came out right after this. So just so you know, a lot of people forgot about this, but after Balls to Picasso came out, they had a double live album called Alive in Studio A, and of course Live at the Marquee. And those live tracks, they did live songs from in the studio from Bruce's, the two solo albums that he had out at the time. And the Live at the Marquee, which was actually recording from a gig at the Marquee that he did, a solo gig. So it's just an interesting point of time in Bruce's musical career. Now, these two songs on these live tracks, these live in the studio tracks, I could do without them. They really don't do anything for me. But generally speaking, I think that I think they did a great job on it. But do I like it better than the original? In my opinion, no. But I do find it very interesting. It's a good listen. It was actually fun listening to reworked versions of these songs that I've been listening to now for over 30 years. But I've always been somebody that has always liked this album. So I just thought it was interesting. He decided to go back and do what he did with this. So would I recommend it? I mean, if you like Bruce Dickinson's stuff, his solo stuff, I definitely recommend at least giving it a listen. I think it's good. I mean, I bought the vinyl and the CD copy of it because I do like it. And I think he did a great job on it. It's a different take on the album. And you got to have an open mind for it because some of the instrumentation and some of the things that he adds to a lot of these songs, a lot of it's unexpected, to be honest. But I would probably say I like the original version of the album better. That's not to say this is bad. The mix isn't bad. Could have been probably a little bit better, but given the type of record that it is, I don't know if they really could have done a better mix on this album. So very, very good. I like it. I definitely recommend getting it if you are a Bruce Dickinson fan. It's definitely worth picking up. And it's interesting. That's the best way to put it. It's just a very quirky record, and he made it a little more quirky. So that's probably the best way to put that. Now let's get into something else that came up recently. So Sebastian Bach, he essentially talks about his record label giving him a bunch of crap because of his Spotify following or lack thereof. So one of the things that he said, and these are not quotes verbatim, but essentially what he said in this article, he said that, and I'll put a link to the article in the show notes. But he said that his fans don't really use Spotify. I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here. And that Spotify sucks. The audio quality sucks, and he doesn't really care about it. He said F Spotify. I'm sure there's a lot of very underpaid artists that would like to say that as well. And I'm going to see if I can find the actual quote here. But he basically says F Spotify. I mean, that's essentially what he is saying. So I'll read the quote here, actually. It says, "My record company, when the album came out, like all the videos are like, what do I got to lose? It's almost at 2 million views now, and it's incredible, but my Spotify numbers are not that great." And they're like, "Why is this?" And I go, F Spotify. And his quote is, "I don't think my fans are into that. I think they're into vinyl and CDs and watching a video on YouTube. I don't give a shit about Spotify. I don't listen to that. The quality of the streaming is garbage compared to what I got going on in my living room. Okay. Folks, you know I've been kind of critical of this guy when he made his remarks after the presidential election. But I got to say I completely 110% agree with this man. So let's first address the Spotify argument that he makes, that most of his fans like vinyl and CDs. I looked up some numbers. The user base of Spotify, 73% of it are people aged 18 to 34. Let me repeat that. Almost 3/4 of the user base on Spotify are people aged 18 to 34. Now, if you look at Sebastian Bach's demographic and his fan base, and I am part of that fan base, I love his music. I like his last solo album a lot. Those people are in their mid 40s, in their 50s, probably early 60s. People that are completely out of the demographic that normally uses Spotify. Again, a majority of Spotify users are ages 18 to 34. Folks, I'm 47 years old. I have never loaded Spotify on my phone. I've never even thought about it. I don't use it. What I do is I buy physical copies of the album, listen to it in my stereo at home, and then I make MP3s of the records to listen to in the car. I basically take the music off the CD, make it into MP3s, and then load it into my phone. So I have it with me in the car. And that's what many people of my generation do. I'm a very late Gen Xer. Sebastian Bach is a Gen Xer. You know, we're from the same generation of people. So and here's the thing, folks, I'm 47. I caught the very tail end of his tenure in Skid Row. I ended up getting into Skid Row right about the time Subhuman Race came out, which was the last album he did with them. So if I'm 47 years old catching the very tail end of his tenure with them, the age group that listens to his music, majority of them are going to be older than me. On top of the fact that the age group that buys the most CDs are people over the age of 35. So people my age. Vinyl is kind of 50-50 because a lot of young people are driving that physical sale, but a lot of older folks also buy vinyl. But the older generation buys more physical product. You know, 35 plus buys more physical product than the people 18 to 34. It's just how it is. So I agree with him. I think that's a very good insight, and I think he's correct on that. And if you want to look further, I did some research on Spotify numbers. When you look at bands like Exodus, or you look at Anthrax, or some of these other legacy metal bands, their following isn't quite as large as some of these metalcore bands putting out a single that have like 1 million, 1.5 million followers. And the reason being is that those metalcore bands appeal to a younger demographic. You know, again, Exodus, their fan base is probably my age or older, probably a majority of them. And the thing is, those people, again, are not, you know, almost 1 out of 4 of them, only like 1 out of 4 of us are using Spotify on a regular basis. So I think he's correct. And I think record labels really need to take into consideration the era and the fan base that basically that a guy like Sebastian Bach or any other legacy metal band, you know, what the age group of their fan base is and what they do. Now, as far as the streaming quality, so I have never loaded Spotify onto my phone, but I have heard people stream it onto various home stereo systems. And, you know, then I compare it to like physical product like CDs, for example. And, you know, I hate to say this, but the streaming quality on Spotify is garbage compared to like physical media, especially CDs. And I've compared both on the same stereo system. It just doesn't sound as good. It's the same thing with like movies. Like if you get a 4K movie off the Roku box or some kind of movie streaming on the internet, that 4K movie does not look as good streaming as it does if you have the Ultra HD, Blu-ray or DVD or whatever you want to call it. It just doesn't. Like if I stream a Star Wars movie off of Disney Plus and then I take the Ultra HD 4K version on an actual disc, put it into my Blu-ray player, it looks so much better than it does streaming. It's just how it is. Streaming, just quality-wise, is not the same, and it's not as good. Now, I've had people make the argument of, streaming, if you pay for it, the streaming quality is higher, and that may be true, but generally speaking, that quality is still not what a CD would be or what physical product in general would be listening to it on a home stereo. So I agree with Sebastian Bach. I completely understand where he's coming from. Again, most of the demographic that follow him are people in their mid-40s all the way into their early 60s. That's like his age bracket. And most of us do not use Spotify. So with that said, going into the break, after this, I'm going to talk about the new Nefarious album, the debut album by Nefarious, and then I'm also going to talk about the new Helloween single, Universe Gravity for Hearts. I'll be right back after this. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Welcome back to the Metal Command podcast here right after the break. Tony here with you, and let's get into an album review. So I'm going to talk about a band who put out their brand new debut album back in July. The band is called Nefarious, and it is comprised of various members and former members of some pretty significant metal bands. So many of you who watched the program remember I had Doug Piercy and Rick Hunolt on the show, both of the guitar players in this band. I had Doug, obviously, many of you know from the band Heathen, Blind Illusion, and of course a local band out in the Bay Area called Anvil Chorus. You have Rick Hunolt. Many of you remember him from Exodus, and that interview will be in the show notes. And the interview was a lot of fun. We talked about a lot of really cool stuff. We talked about this album, a little bit of history, talked about a little musical history, some of our favorite guitar players and musicians, and it was an incredible interview. It really was a lot of fun. It felt like I was sitting in the rehearsal room where those guys rehearse at, and we were just hanging out as friends, talking music. So it was a really fun interview. The vocalist in the band is Keaton Tapania from Hyrax. Many of you know him from there. Tom Gears is the bass player. Tom, of course, many of you know from Blind Illusion. And Will Carroll, the drummer from Death Angel, is the drummer in this band. So many people consider this a sort of supergroup because you have a lot of people from a lot of these very relevant heavy metal bands or people that played in some relevant bands. And at the time of the interview that I did with Doug and Rick, I had only heard 2 songs off of the album. Maybe I think the third single might have just come out. So I had only heard 3 singles. Now, as I referenced before, the interview with myself, Doug, and Rick, it felt like I was sitting in their rehearsal room, and their first video was them, basically playing in their rehearsal room. And that's the kind of vibe that this band has and that the album has. But I had not heard the album at the time of the interview. So now I have listened to the entire album. So far the first couple of songs that I had heard, I thought were pretty solid. I think One Nation Enslaved was great, actually. But now we have an entire album to listen to and to talk about. Folks, normally when you have these supergroup type situations or former members of other significant bands or current members of these bands, when they get together to make an album, typically the project is overhyped. It typically underdelivers. The expectations get very, very high, and the reviews tend to be not good. It's just how it happens. It happens a lot. There are so many projects out there that I can tell you about that, that this has happened. The other thing that typically happens is, in many cases, most people don't like these albums as much as they, like the bands these guys are either in or came from. So many of you remember when I talked about the brand new single, when the song One Nation Enslaved, and that came out, I talked about how good the song was. I thought it was great. And this album is pretty good, especially for a debut album from a bunch of guys that really hadn't really played in bands together for any significant amount of time. It is what it is. If I were to describe it, so a lot of people are thinking, is this going to be a thrash metal album? For those of you that have not heard it, it does have a lot of thrash elements in it. However, it has more of a new wave of British heavy metal vibe as well. It has a kind of a combination of both. And I thought that combination is quite interesting, because usually when you get bands like this together, you're going to have a bunch of rehashed thrash metal. I mean, that's typically what most people would expect, but it's not really like that. It has more of a stripped down new wave of British heavy metal vibe meets thrash. That could have a lot to do with, maybe Doug playing a lot of these Angel Witch songs that he had been playing live. But I got to be honest, I think it's a very strong debut album. I think it's pretty good. I think that when you get these guys together to make a record like this, kind of more, it felt like the way it was described in the interview, this album just sort of happened. People got together, started writing songs, and then it just turned into a record. It just sometimes happens like that. But the cool thing about the album itself is that when you listen to it, it feels like all of these guys have been playing together, all 5 of them, for a very, very long time. Now, that could have a lot to do with the fact these guys are very seasoned musicians, but nevertheless, when I went to listen to the first song, Mere Death, on the album, which I had not heard until I was actually given the full-length album, I really liked it. It was cool. It's definitely different from the singles that came out. But the album definitely has this new wave of British heavy metal meets thrash metal vibe. And it doesn't have like the polished, super polished Andy Sneap production to it. But it doesn't really need that. And the songs, are these guys reinventing the wheel? No. But the songs are fun. And it's a cool record. It's a good record. Rick and Doug, and I said this in the interview with them, they sound like they've been playing guitar together in a band for a couple decades. Now, that could be the fact that they just came from the same scene and played the same, kind of music coming up. Many of the same influences. We did talk about a lot of guitar players that influenced both of them. But nevertheless, this is a good album. I like it. And usually when I know I like an album is when I just find myself going to it a lot. And that is what this album has done, for me as far as a listener. Now, let me talk about another aspect about this record that I think is very, very good. And I think really, I think the reason I think it's good is because this record has something that a lot of these other kinds of projects don't have. Really good vocals. So when it comes to these bands, these supergroup bands that get together, a lot of times one of the biggest problems I have, especially with some of these thrash guys when they put some of these projects together, the vocals suck. Well, folks, this Nefarious album, the vocals are incredible. Caton DePena killed it on this album. He sounded incredible. And I think one of the things that sets this project apart from a lot of other projects or bands that a lot of the contemporaries of these guys have put together, the vocals really help the songs. The songs are good, but you need the right vocalist. And I think getting Caton to sing on this was definitely the right move for these guys. And he sings in sort of a style that you normally don't hear from him, in his other band. And we did elaborate on that in the interview. This is the interview segment with Rick and Doug where they talk about Caton's vocals. Check out this clip.
Yeah, one of the things too, I think that you picked the right singer for the tracks as well. And
I'll tell you something about Caton. Caton is when we brought him up here the first time, we gave him 150% freedom to do whatever he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He came in with an empty slate. He barely even heard the songs he was about to sing on, and he barely even had read any of the lyrics. He just came up and honestly did a really, really, really fine job. He has never sung like this before. It's kind of like a new Caton, you know what I mean? And we gave him free reign.
Yeah. He had, one of the interesting things is that he has a little bit more of there's certain parts of the songs that he uses kind of more of his melodic side of his singing voice.
Oh, just wait till you hear the rest.
Yeah. I think that really, that's kind of what blew me away, because I've never really heard him sing the way that he does on these two tracks, at least so far that have come out. And I think that it fit really well with the music.
Yep.
Well, that's just kind of like how the production style went, I mean, I had most of the lyrics figured out, like the Addicted to Power song. I think that was the first one we did, or was it? I don't remember.
With Caton?
Yeah, and I already had the lyrics already written, and I had kind of an idea how to do the vocals lines, but I wasn't really fully sure, of the melody and all that. I mean, we'd actually demoed with another singer. So I did have actually a relatively reasonable, idea of where the direction could go. But then that's where what Rick said is absolutely true. I just showed Caton how we were doing it, and I go, look, take it from here and run with this ball. It's like the quarterback throws the ball out to the tight end, or the wide receiver or the running back, and he'll go and run, and he'll come up with some interesting variations of the same thing. And that's where the gold is, because he would take, he would kind of like not really be sure where to start. And I go, well, here's a starting point. Why don't you just take it and see what you can do with this and run with it? And that's when the magic would happen. So that happened a whole bunch of times, pretty much on every song, this procedure. At first we weren't really sure how to do it, and he was a little nervous. But then it didn't take too long for all the ice was broken and it was all easy, and we were just laughing and having a good time, and we were trying out stuff. And then he'd go back home and we'd all listen, and then he'd come back the next weekend and we would fine tune some parts that were good, but both of us would have some ideas on how to proceed with it, and Tom was sitting there engineering. Like, we did most of the recording of the vocals at Tom's house. And so Tom would run he runs his studio, and I'd sit there and help Caton out with the lyrics and, just how to approach the song, and just watch as the magic comes out. And it was pretty cool.
I honestly think that Caton surprised himself at times too. I could feel it when I was there. I was like, wow, dude, that's really badass, because he's never sang like that before. He did a really good job, but we gave him free reign and just to be Caton, and I think he's happy with the finished product.
Sure.
Yeah, I realized he could kind of go in the direction of Bruce a little bit, Bruce Dickinson, this sort of an approach, but he's still heavier with a lot of this kind of old school metal vibe.
Yeah.
But then he has elements of singing capabilities very similar in some ways to like what Bruce would do. So I just kind of kept thinking in that direction and helping him along with that, and then letting him run with it,
Plus, he's got so much.
He was
experience.
awesome.
He's got a lot of experience with phrasing, and he's got a lot of experience in metal.
Yeah.
Period. So he knows what he's doing. He's a pro.
Okay, so that's Rick Hunolt and Doug Piercy talking about Caton DePena's vocals on this new, brand new debut album by the band Nefarious. And, I think it's cool. I think they did a tremendous job allowing Caton to just do his thing. And I think that added a lot to these songs. These guys, when you listen to the interview, they talked about just trying to make the songs better. There was no ego. There were no egos involved. There was no nonsense or drama involved. These songs sort of evolved by guys coming in and doing things to make them better. And it definitely shows. For a debut record from 5 guys that never jammed all together in a band before, I got to be honest, I think it's a good record. And I'm in, one of the things that you always think of is, what's the next album going to sound like? What are these guys going to come up with? One of the things that I like about this record a lot too is that it sounds more organic. It doesn't sound like too constructed. It's probably the best adjective I can use for that. There's nothing fake about it. I mean, these guys just went in, jammed these songs out, refined them. There was no major, huge process and, going through and making this record. It was just kind of a natural record. It just came to them. When you talk about how the whole band came together, that's how it happened. It just naturally happened that way. It's weird. There was no, it didn't feel like there was an intention. Hey, let's start a band to do this project. It just kind of happened. But you get that feel from this record. So, to be honest, I think it's a great, solid debut album. These guys, are they reinventing the wheel? No, but they don't have to. Guys like Rick and Doug are people that helped invent the scene, that were part of it, that were part, even though, these guys aren't in Metallica or any of these huge bands, they were part of the Bay Area scene. They were part of helping to develop its sound. They were a part of it. They helped invent it. And they've written, it's really about good songs in the end. And that's what this record has. Mere Death, I talked about the first song on the album. You obviously have the title track, Addicted to Power. That was one of the singles. It's a great track. One Nation Enslaved was the single. That's the last song in the album. In fact, that song is actually probably one of my favorites, probably my favorite on the album. And then you have a song called Together We Rise, which I think is probably my favorite on the album. So, yeah, probably my favorite. And then One Nation Enslaved to be a close second. So, good record. Good debut album. If you want to check it out, obviously, I will have a link in the show notes to check the record out. Go to the band's website. But there is an interview with myself, Rick Hunolt, and Doug Piercy. Again, incredible record. Those guys are really cool. I think for a debut album, they really hit home. They really did hit a home run with it. And I can't wait to hopefully see another record down the road. But other than that, these are my thoughts on the debut album by Nefarious. So let's get into the last segment of this podcast. Helloween has released a brand new single off of their upcoming album, Giants and Monsters. The single is called Universe Gravity for Hearts. The album comes out August 29th, so it comes out very soon. And many of you have heard me talk about this song in my review of the brand new Helloween album, which I will put in the show notes. Also in the show notes, I have an interview I just did with one of the guitar players at Helloween, guy I know pretty well, Sasha Gerstner. And Sasha is the one that wrote Universe Gravity for Hearts. Before I get into my thoughts on them releasing this song, let me replay the clip again where Sasha talks about the song itself. Check this out. Universe it sounds like something that could be on Keeper 2. And you have a lot of really cool parts in the middle, where Kai is singing. So let's talk about that song first. What'd you write that about? And, what was the process in creating that? Because I'll be honest with you, that's one of the songs I've hit on repeat about, 50 times
when I started listening to this.
Oh, well, first off, thank you. It's great to see now that we're doing this interview run, how well people are reflecting on what you had on mind when you were writing the song, because most of the times you have a certain vibe when you do something creatively, but you don't know how people will soak that in, and if they would reflect the same feeling, and what I received so far is exactly the things you said, and it's kind of making me happy to see that it worked, because especially Universe was very tough to create, because it really took me a couple of days to connect all the parts and in a demo period, So what I typically would do if I write songs, I would play an instrument. It would be guitar or synthesizer, and I would play around and do some sound design. That's what I basically do, just for fun, And then most of the times, at the same time, I start singing. So for me, it's always about the vocals. So vocals are always hero for me. So I start playing around, doing some sound design, and start singing, and then something's just coming up. It could be either be phonetically nonsense, so I would just like start to sing something that sounds English, but it doesn't make sense. And in that process, most of the time there comes some hook up to my mind, And with this song, it happened the same way. I was creating this super dystopian clean guitar sound, and I started singing, and I suddenly had that word universe coming in. I don't want to be too esoterical about it, but it was just being something that was coming up, and then it was evolving to what it is now. It was like I woke up the next morning, I was starting recording. I woke up the next morning, and I had a pretty good first verse, and then I thought like, okay, I have to continue. I was like really into it so much to finish the song. I had a feeling it's something that's gonna be big, and I knew it will be probably a pretty long song, because things started to develop on my mind while I was doing parts. It was like, okay, and there will be, I want to do this part, and I want to go into another in a breakdown, and so it was really a journey for me, and doing a song like this was just like giving birth to an idea, and also like lyrical wise. I think what happens now with me in this day and age is that I kind of mature up with my writing. It was always fun for me to write songs, and like you said, I'm like 22 or 23 years in a band, and when I joined the band, I was 25 years old, so pretty young by that time. But I was already accepted, and they already wanted to have my song ideas, and it was fun to do that. But I was like very naive by that time. Like I didn't think too much about it, and I also didn't know when it came to lyrics and subjects. On the first record we did together, I had a lot of help from Andy, who's a great songwriter. What he does is impressive, also over such a career span, lifespan that he has, delivering always high quality songs, and that was really inspiring for me. But I had the appreciation already, but I don't think my songs were as mature as they are now. That's at least how it feels for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've written some really great tracks. People will still bring up a song like "Listen to the Flies" and some of your other stuff that you wrote early on. I see it in social media comments. I just see people's comments in general, and I think for me, I just like when the two people on this album that really surprised me were you and Kai. Because Kai kind of, if you go and listen to a lot of the Gamma Ray albums, Kai has a pretty distinct songwriting style that's changed. That had changed a little bit since he was out of Helloween, and it just, you guys, both of you, I think, the songs you wrote took turns I was not expecting. Okay, so that's Sasha talking about the track. Now, what do I think about them releasing this as a single? Folks, this is like the perfect song they could have released as a single. So, This Is Tokyo was the previous single. Obviously, a more of a hard rock, straight ahead hard rock song. Andy Darius's bread and butter that he's done for a long time. And of course, the reaction was pretty good, but it did elicit a response from naysayers and people that are like, oh my God, where's the epic Helloween stuff? And as I said when I reviewed This Is Tokyo, I said, it's coming. It's on the album. They just released this as a first single. And I told everybody a big reason probably why that happened. You want to pay tribute to one of the most consistent markets that has supported your band. And they always release singles like that. Just how it is. They always have a straight ahead hard rock song as a single. So Universe Gravity for Hearts comes out, which to me is the perfect single they could have put out from this album to follow that up. It is a classic sounding Helloween song. I mean, you don't get any more epic or classic than this record. This song. And it has an outstanding performance from Michael Kiske. It has the old school Helloween vibe to it. But it was not written by Kai or anyone else. Kai Hansen sings in the middle of it, but the song was completely constructed by Sasha. And for those of you that doubt that, I can tell you 100% for certain that he wrote the song. And it goes into something else that I've said. And I have been saying this for quite a while. I think Sasha's an incredible songwriter. I think he's been an incredible asset to this band since he joined. And I remember when he joined. I remember Weike talking about how much he really liked this guy and how right Sasha was for this band. And now, 22 plus years later, 30 plus songs later, that's what we have. Sasha, again, is an incredible songwriter, in my opinion. He's written some incredible songs in his tenure. He's either written or co-written some incredible songs during his tenure in this band. So him writing Universe, number one, Universe is probably my favorite. Universe and Hand of God, the two songs he wrote for the upcoming album Giants and Monsters, I think are the two best songs he's ever written for this band. And I like a lot of the stuff he's written for this band. Open Your Life, Listen to the Flies, Pleasure Drone, Dreambound, You Stupid Mankind, Who is Mr. Madman? I can go on and on. Hold Me in Your Arms, World of War. There's just so many songs this guy has written that I absolutely love. Wicked Game, which is a B-side from the My God Given Right album. But there's a lot of songs Sasha has written. He wrote Best Time on the last album. So I like a lot of his material and things that he has written over the years. I think the guy's an incredible player, an incredible guitar player, and an incredible songwriter. So when people, and it's weird because there were a couple comments of people like, I can't believe this guy, he didn't write that. Folks, where have you been? Like I said, this man has written some incredible songs. It did not shock me. In fact, what was weird about it is that when I heard the intro and the opening riffs, I automatically, without even looking at any songwriting credits, I automatically knew the guy wrote this just by his playing style. One of the things that makes Helloween quite an interesting band, especially now, is you have three guitar players with three very distinct playing styles. And two or even three vocalists, really, that have completely different singing styles, yet it works. But I think this is a great record. It has everything you want in an epic Helloween-style song. And I just think Sasha just knocked it out of the park.
the guy really hit a home run with this song. And I think the band was right to release this as a single because it makes sense. You have This Is Tokyo, kind of the more straight ahead hard rock song, and you have a couple of those on the album, and then you release a very long epic song. And they pretty much, if you look at the last album, Skyfall, Fear the Fallen, two very epic sounding Helloween songs. And then you had a straight ahead rock song like Best Time. So it made sense to put those out as singles. So I think the songs they put out as singles for this upcoming album, Giants and Monsters, I think these songs make a lot of sense. And I agree with them putting them out. Having heard the whole album, it makes sense why they put these tracks out. Now, will they have another single coming up? I don't know. With them, it's a little bit interesting because they may usually put out two songs and then put the album out, then do another single to promote it. I think that's what they did with the self-titled album. And that may happen. But, there's a couple other songs that would make great singles for them. And they may be a single down the road after the album comes out. Again, you want to keep that name out there. So it would make sense. Personally, for me, if I'm a band, I'm going to put a couple songs out, let the album come out, and then I'll put another single or two out to promote it. And that's probably most likely what may happen. Who knows? Nevertheless, I don't think they could have put out a more perfect song as a single. So that's where we're at, folks. That's all I have for you today here on the Metal Command podcast. Again, thanks for listening. If you want to support the show, please, by all means, hit the subscribe button. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And if you follow the show on any other form of streaming service or social media, by all means, give the show a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.